Welcome to Map Crow, the RPG art show. My name is Kyle, and today we're building better angels. Today is brought to you in part by the generous contributions of the lovely backers of the Map Crow Patreon. If you would like to receive digital minis and terrains for your virtual tabletop gaming, head on over to patreon.com/mapcrow and pledge today. So that's right, today we are back doing the Building Better Monsters series, so we are starting off with a monster of biblical proportions. Over the last few months, while I have taken a break from the Building Better Monsters series, I have received countless wonderful suggestions, and I have made a spreadsheet to keep track of them, and this is one that no one had asked me to do. But I think that the so-called biblically accurate angel is such an interesting design to iterate on and bring into fantasy gaming, so I just couldn't resist. As soon as the notion came into my head, I knew I had to make a video on it. If this is your first Building Better Monsters video, welcome. I'm so glad that you're here. A couple of ground rules. Whenever I talk about how I think monsters in my own game would be made more interesting, I am not telling you what to do at your own table or how Wizards of the Coast has gotten it wrong or something like that. I'm just trying to be creative and have fun, so please take this video in that spirit. Secondly, this is not really an art demonstration video, so if you are curious about what tools and methods I'm using to create this image, you probably ought to check out the other videos linked in the description below. The biblically accurate angel is probably most clearly described in the book of Ezekiel. So in this book, the prophet Ezekiel sees a vision of God coming in, being pulled on this throne by all of these bizarre kind of creatures that have too many heads, too many eyes, too many wings, and wheels. These creatures are never referred to in the Bible as angels because the Bible is not a monster manual. But because the only servants of heaven that really get named as a specific kind of creature in the Bible are called angels, which is just Greek for messenger, these wheelie, wingy eyeball things get lumped in with that category. So the term biblically accurate angel isn't itself terribly accurate, and in fact only refers to one specific kind of entity that is referred to only a few times in the Bible. That said, a fuzzy understanding of mythological imagery is basically the bread and butter of the monster manual, so let's continue in that spirit. The resonant image of this kind of impossible creature with too many eyes sitting in judgment over humanity is one that I think we can really play up with and bring in my favorite flavor to add to monsters: horror. Now, I don't think it's too much of a stretch or that inappropriate to suggest that if suddenly in the sky you beheld the vision of this many-winged eyeball wheel creature, that you would immediately jump to a feeling of cosmic horror. The description of this creature from Ezekiel might easily be compared to some of Lovecraft's own concoctions. And if you imagine what it would be like to be in a city and not of the faith that this creature represents, and then suddenly it's kind of like smiting everybody there, sort of mostly without warning. Perhaps the only preamble is like a guy in sackcloth and ashes who is doing some performance art in the street for a few weeks beforehand. Well, yes, this really does sound like cosmic horror, doesn't it? But how do we want the players to interact with this entity? And do we want them to have like a big drawn-out combat with them? Well, of course, you're welcome to do that if your characters are a high enough level and you think that would be fun. But I think what's interesting about angels and what separates them from other kinds of monsters you would find in the monster manual is they come with rules and covenants. The earlier books of the Bible are filled with stories about cities and nations populated by people who don't believe in the Judeo-Christian God and yet are kind of given a heads up. A prophet or a judge will appear on the scene and let people know, hey, you broke some rules. Repent or suffer the consequences. Now, this suggests some pretty good adventure design in two key ways. One, it gives us a ticking clock, a sense of urgency. We have a certain amount of time to do something before the worst happens to us. And secondly, it gives us kind of a way out of this, a specific activity or parameter to fulfill to avoid calamity. In other words, this is a quest. So to continue digging into the genre conventions, if prophets and judges are always showing up to tell people how to get out of trouble, then why do we have so many stories of cities and nations being smoten? Well, I'll tell you. It's because the prophets and judges oftentimes look like lunatics, because even if they have seen the visions, nobody else has. So in our adventure designed around this biblically accurate angel, let's have some kind of hermit who is either seeded into the campaign earlier or kind of like suddenly busts in to the scene to alert our heroes of the impending doom. So, as an example, you all meet in a tavern, and suddenly this guy dressed in camel skins and leaves kicks down the door and starts screaming about the end being nigh, repent or be smoten, all that kind of stuff. And he gets up in one of your characters' faces and smears some oil or mud or something on the forehead of one or more of your characters. And the next time they go outside, they see what the prophet sees. They see this monster hanging out over the city, just kind of hovering there, waiting for the appointed time to wipe this city off the map. And I think it's probably pretty important for this story that no matter what the prophet or the player characters do, they cannot do anything that will allow another character to see this angel hanging in the sky. So now we have introduced the stakes, and we need to then unfold somehow what needs to be done. And this thing that needs to be done has to be something within the agency of our characters to accomplish. Something appropriate to the fantasy genre of your game that has the flavoring of this religious drama that we're dipping into. For instance, maybe one of the major temples in the city has brought in its walls a profane artifact or idol to a fallen god or something like that. So it falls upon our heroes to steal the idol from the temple and take it out into the wilderness and redeposit it into the dungeon from whence it came. And maybe they get this quest from the hermit prophet, or maybe they climb up the tallest tower in the city and talk to the angel directly. And if that should happen, I think it's very important to carry some consequences with that communication. People who talk to angels rarely walk away the same in these stories. In fact, even to speak with the servants of the Almighty, oftentimes there's some kind of purification that needs to happen. Their tongues need to be burned with a coal so they never speak an unclean word again. Or they fall over in a seizure, or they're struck blind. You know, all these kinds of things happen in these kinds of stories. And it's important in a fantasy game not to make this too punishing, but something needs to happen, something needs to change. And in fact, I would probably just ask my player, how is your character forever changed or affected by this? Or I would just write up a D10 random table of different marks and effects that people who talk to angels might get. And probably the last big question I would answer if I was a GM running a game like this is, what happens if the player characters fail? What happens if they get put in jail trying to get this idol out of the temple? I think it'd be kind of interesting, especially if this wasn't the first adventure of the campaign, if the characters knew some NPCs in the town, if the angel, put the guards to sleep and let the player characters walk out of their prison cell and choose, a person each that they can take out of the city to spare them or something like that. I think that would be a great, interesting way of giving this adventure some weight and consequence to it, but also man, what a heavy choice to make. It'd be kind of a bummer way to end the adventure, and it would probably bring the campaign to a stop, but at least it would have some kind of meaningful denouement to it. And when I start using words like denouement, it means that it's time to wrap up the video. So thank you so much for watching, and if you have some topics or monsters that you would like me to do a video on, please leave them in the comments below. I have been collecting those into a list. I don't often have the time to respond to everybody's comments, but I do read almost all of them. Also, liking the video and commenting on it really helps the algorithm notice what we're doing here and brings other people into this conversation that we're having. So until next time, my friends,
do not be afraid, for behold, I bring you good news of great joy.